I never expected that agreeing to help a near stranger move would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest shifts often start with the smallest decisions, with a simple yes to a question you never saw coming. Before that day, my life was a neat collection of routines, predictable and safe, lived inside the four walls of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my computer screen. Well, after it became something else entirely. Something messier, more complicated, and infinitely more beautiful. It all started with a knock on the door and a request for help with some boxes. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 28, working from home as a freelance graphic designer, and living a life that was, for lack of a better word, quiet. My apartment was my sanctuary, a carefully curated space where everything had its place. The silence was a comfortable friend, the solitude a welcome blanket. I had friends, of course, people I'd see for dinner or drinks on the weekends, but my day-to-day existence was a solitary one by design. It was easier that way. Less risk, less potential for the kind of emotional upheaval that I'd spent my early 20s actively avoiding. My world was small, but it was mine. The building I lived in was an old brick structure with charming, if slightly drafty, windows and floors that creaked with history. I knew the rhythms of the place like my own heartbeat. I knew Mrs. Gable and 2B got the newspaper delivered at 6:15 every morning, and that the couple in 4A had a penchant for loud, dramatic arguments that always ended in equally loud, dramatic reconciliations. I was an observer, a chronicler of the small, mundane lives happening around me, while keeping my own firmly under wraps. Then Caleb moved into 3B, the apartment directly across the hall from mine. I first saw him on a Tuesday, wrestling a large, awkward ficus tree through the main entrance. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt. His hair was a dark, unruly mess, and his face, concentrated in effort, was all sharp angles and a dusting of stubble. He radiated a kind of effortless confidence, a physical competence that was a world away from my own existence, which mostly involved a mouse, a keyboard, and an ergonomic chair. My initial assessment, from the safe distance of my peephole, was simple. He was striking, dangerously so, and, in all likelihood, completely unattainable. That was the category I placed men like him in. Men with an easy physicality, who looked like they knew their way around a tool belt and probably spent their weekends hiking or playing some competitive sport. They belonged to a different world than I did. So, I filed him away as Caleb, the handsome new neighbor. A new, interesting character to observe from afar, and nothing more. Over the next few weeks, our interactions were limited to the brief, polite nods and hey's that are standard currency in apartment building hallways. I learned small things about him in snippets. I smelled sawdust clinging to his clothes one afternoon, a clean, earthy scent that was surprisingly pleasant. I saw him carrying in groceries that included a lot of fresh vegetables and what looked like a whole chicken. Once, I heard the faint, melodic sound of an acoustic guitar coming from his apartment, a gentle, hesitant tune that seemed at odds with the powerful physique I'd first noticed. Each new piece of information was like a small stone tossed into the placid pond of my assumptions. He wasn't just some generic handsome guy. There were layers there, hints of a softer, more complex person beneath the surface. It was intriguing, and my quiet observation started to feel less like detached ethnography and more like, well, a crush. A hopeless, hallway-based crush. I would sometimes find myself timing my trips to the laundry room, hoping for a chance encounter, only to chastise myself for being foolish. Hope was a dangerous thing, and I was out of practice. I told myself to just appreciate the view, to enjoy the fleeting moments of connection without assigning them any deeper meaning. It was a good plan. It was a safe plan, and it was about to be completely demolished. The inciting incident, the moment everything tilted on its axis, came on a Saturday morning. I was in my usual weekend uniform, old sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt, nursing my first cup of coffee and scrolling through emails. A frantic, heavy knocking on my door startled me, pulling me from my digital days. It wasn't the polite tap of a delivery person, it was urgent. My heart did a nervous little flutter. I peered through the peephole, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Caleb. He looked stressed, his hair was wilder than usual, and he was chewing on his lower lip. I opened the door, trying to arrange my face into an expression of casual neutrality. Hey, I managed, my voice a little rough with morning disuse. Hey man, Miles, right? He asked, pointing a thumb at my door and then at himself. Caleb. From across the hall, he gave me a harried, apologetic smile that did strange things to my stomach. I am so sorry to bother you. I know we don't really know each other, but I'm in a huge bind. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to look relaxed. No problem. What's up? Internally, my mind was racing. Was it a fire? A leak? A medical emergency? He ran a hand through his already chaotic hair, making it stand up in even more directions. Okay, so long story short, my moving situation has been a complete disaster. I had most of my stuff in a storage unit, and the moving company I hired to get it today just canceled. Last minute. Something about a truck breaking down, he sighed, a sound full of frustration. The thing is, my lease on the unit is up tomorrow, and if I don't get my stuff out, they're going to charge me for a whole other month, and I can't afford that right now. I nodded, starting to understand. This wasn't a 5-alarm fire, but it was a classic life is kicking them down kind of emergency. I knew the feeling. That's awful, I said, and I meant it. So you need to move everything today? Yeah, that's the plan. I rented a U-Haul, but, and this is the really pathetic part, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. I severely overestimated my ability to move a 1-bedroom apartment's worth of furniture by myself. I've been at it for 2 hours and have managed to get my dresser wedged in the storage unit's doorway. He looked at me then, his gaze direct and pleading. It was the first time he'd really, truly looked at me, not just as a passing neighbor, but as a person. His eyes were a deep, warm hazel, flecked with green. I know this is a massive ask, but would you be willing to help? I can pay you, of course, and buy you all the pizza and beer you can handle. My brain split into 2 distinct factions. The first, the cautious, logical part, screamed a list of objections. You're not strong enough. You'll hurt your back. You have work to do. It's awkward. Say no. It was the voice of self-preservation, the one that had kept my life neat and tidy for so long. But the second voice, the one I had been trying to ignore for weeks, was quieter but far more persuasive. It's him. He's asking you for help. This is a chance. A real chance to talk to him, to be near him. Don't be a coward. For a moment, I just stood there, the war raging in my head. He must have seen the hesitation on my face, because his expression fell slightly. Look, it's totally cool if you can't. I get it. It's my mess up, not yours. I can probably find someone on a task app or something. He started to trail off, already formulating a new plan. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let him. I couldn't let this opportunity, this crack in the wall of my routine, just pass me by. No, I said, maybe a little too quickly. No, I can help. Absolutely. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost palpable. His smile was back, wider and more genuine this time. Really? Oh, man, you are a lifesaver. Seriously, I owe you big time. Don't worry about it, I said, already feeling a nervous thrill course through me. Just let me put on some actual clothes, and I'll be right out. Awesome. Thank you, Miles. Thank you. He backed away toward his own door, that incredible smile still on his face. I closed my door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, taking a deep breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and exhilarating hope. My quiet, predictable Saturday was officially over. I was about to spend the entire day with Caleb. The thought was both terrifying and the most exciting thing that had happened to me in years. An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a rumbling U-Haul, the scent of stale coffee and sun-baked vinyl filling the cab. Caleb drove with a relaxed, one-handed confidence, navigating the city streets with an ease I couldn't imagine mustering. We fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm of small talk, punctuated by the grunts and groans of the truck's transmission. We talked about the neighborhood, the best places for coffee, the quirks of our old building. It was all surface-level stuff, but it felt significant. It felt like we were sketching the outline of a friendship, maybe something more. He told me he was a carpenter, specializing in custom furniture. That's why some of this stuff is so ridiculously heavy, he explained with a laugh. I have a thing for solid wood. Oak, walnut, no particle board for me. It explained the sawdust and the faint, sweet smell of what I'd noticed on him. He spoke about grains and joinery with a passion that was captivating. He wasn't just a guy who built things, he was an artist. This was the first real crack in the facade of the jock archetype I had built in my mind. When we got to the storage facility, I understood the scale of his problem. The unit was packed to the ceiling with boxes, furniture wrapped in blankets, and assorted life detritus. And just as he'd said, a beautiful, dark wood dresser was wedged sideways in the metal doorway, a monument to his solo effort. "Behold, my failure," he announced with a dramatic sweep of his arm. I couldn't help but laugh. "All right, let's see. If I push from this side while you lift and pivot." And so our day began. It was hard work. Grimy, sweaty, back-straining work. We were a whirlwind of motion, carrying boxes, maneuvering unwieldy furniture, and packing the truck with a Tetris-like precision that was mostly Caleb's doing. I discovered that my works-from-home muscles were not, in fact, prepared for this level of physical exertion. But I didn't care. Every shared grimace as we lifted something heavy, every brief moment we had to stop and catch our breath, every time our hands accidentally brushed as we passed a box to one another felt charged with a strange energy. He was thoughtful and considerate throughout the whole process. He always made sure to take the heavier end of whatever we were carrying. He insisted we take frequent water breaks, handing me a cold bottle with a grateful smile each time. During one of these breaks, sitting on the truck's tailgate, he pointed to a large, flat, carefully wrapped object leaning against the wall of the unit. "That's the last thing," he said, "and the most important." "What is it?" I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm. "It's a painting," he said, his voice a little softer. "My mom painted it. It's the only thing of hers I have left." And there it was, the second crack in the facade. A moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push, but the admission hung in the air between us, changing the dynamic from one of simple neighborly help to something more intimate. I was no longer just some guy helping him move his stuff. I was someone he had shared a piece of his history with, a piece of his grief. "We'll be extra careful with it," I said quietly. He looked at me, his hazel eyes seeming to search my face for a moment, and then he gave me a small, genuine nod. "Thanks, Miles." The rest of the loading went by in a haze of focused effort. By the time we were done, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We were both filthy, covered in a layer of dust and sweat, and every muscle in my body ached. But as we slammed the truck's roll-up door shut, a sense of shared accomplishment settled over us. We had done it. We had conquered the mountain of boxes. The drive back was quieter. We were both tired, the easy banter of the morning replaced by a comfortable silence. When we finally got all the boxes and furniture into his apartment, a chaotic maze of cardboard and wood in the middle of his living room, I felt a pang of disappointment. The day was over. I'd have to go back to my quiet apartment, back to my routine, and he would be here, in his new life. "I cannot thank you enough," Caleb said, leaning against a stack of boxes and looking around at the beautiful disaster we had created. "There is absolutely no way I could have done this without you." "It was no problem," I lied, my aching back screaming in protest. Glad I could help, I started to inch toward the door, preparing to make my exit. "Hey, wait," he said. "The deal was pizza and beer. My treat. You can't leave yet." He gestured to the floor. "I have no idea where my plates are, but we can eat out of the box. Please, let me thank you properly." My logical brain, what was left of it, told me to go home, shower, and collapse. But the hopeful part of me, which had been growing stronger all day, wouldn't hear of it. "Okay," I said, a smile breaking through my exhaustion. "Pizza sounds perfect." While he was on the phone ordering, I looked around the apartment. It was a mirror image of my own, but it already felt so different. It felt like him. The ficus tree stood proudly in one corner, and leaning against the far wall was his mother's painting, still carefully wrapped. Amidst the chaos of boxes, he had taken the time to unwrap one thing, a small, beautiful acoustic guitar, which he had gently placed on a stack of blankets. It was the same guitar I had heard him playing through the walls. Seeing it there, in person, felt like being let in on another one of his secrets. My perception of him had been completely reshaped over the course of a single day. The confident, athletic guy I had imagined was still there, but he was intertwined with a thoughtful, artistic, and vulnerable man who loved his mother's painting and played gentle melodies on an old guitar. And I was falling for him. Hard. The pizza arrived, and with it came the turning point. Not with a crash or a bang, but in the quiet, weary aftermath of a long day's work. We sat on the living room floor, pizza boxes open between us, leaning our backs against the wall. The only furniture assembled in the entire apartment was his bed, a simple, dark wood frame he'd built himself, holding a bare mattress. It sat in the corner of the room like an island in a sea of cardboard. The air was thick with the smell of pepperoni and exhaustion. "So," Caleb said after a few moments of companionable chewing, "graphic designer, huh? What kind of stuff do you do?" I found myself opening up in a way I rarely did, talking about my work, my passion for clean lines and effective communication, the freedom and loneliness of being a freelancer. He listened intently, not in the polite, waiting for his turn to talk way that so many people do, but with a genuine curiosity. He asked smart questions, questions that made me feel seen and understood. Then he talked more about his carpentry. He spoke of the feeling of taking a raw piece of wood and shaping it into something beautiful and functional, something that would be a part of someone's home, their life. "It feels permanent," he said, looking at his own hands, which were calloused and flecked with paint. "In a world where everything feels so temporary, you know? Making something solid, it helps." His voice was quiet, reflective, and it resonated with a part of me I didn't often share, the part that longed for that same sense of permanence. The sun had completely set, and the only light in the room came from the streetlights outside, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. The beer, combined with the physical exhaustion, was making my head feel fuzzy and warm. The conversation drifted, becoming slower, more personal. We talked about cities we'd lived in, bad jobs we'd had, the strangeness of being nearly 30 and still feeling like you were figuring everything out. "My last place, it was with my ex," Caleb said suddenly, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. "It ended a few months ago. That's why I had all my stuff in storage. Took me a while to, get my feet back under me." He didn't say if the ex was a man or a woman, and I didn't dare to ask. But the simple act of sharing that piece of his story felt monumental. It was another layer peeled back, another piece of trust offered. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Breakups are the worst." "Yeah," he sighed. "They are." He finally turned to look at me, a wry, tired smile on his face. "But hey, new apartment. New start, right?" "Right," I agreed, my own smile feeling a little fragile. We finished the pizza in a comfortable silence. My body was screaming for sleep, every muscle a dull, throbbing ache. My eyelids felt like they had tiny weights attached to them. I saw Caleb yawn, a wide, jaw-cracking yawn that he tried and failed to stifle. "Man, I'm wrecked," he mumbled, his head lolling back against the wall. "Me too," I admitted, my own voice thick with sleep. I should probably head back to my place, but I made no move to get up. The thought of crossing the hallway felt like climbing a mountain. Plus, a bigger, more selfish part of me didn't want to leave. The space between us was charged, humming with all the unspoken things, with the easy intimacy that comes from shared struggle and bone-deep weariness. Caleb's eyes were closed. His breathing was deep and even. "Just 5 more minutes," he murmured, his words slurring slightly. He shifted, trying to get more comfortable against the hard wall, and as he did, his head slumped sideways, coming to rest gently on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending lit up. His hair, soft and smelling faintly of sawdust and sweat, brushed against my cheek. I could feel the warmth of him, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake him up. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp around this single, perfect point of contact. This was it, the moment where I had a choice. I could shift away, gently wake him, make a joke about how tired we were, and retreat to the safety of my own apartment. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. It would preserve the plausible deniability of the situation, chalking it up to nothing more than pure exhaustion. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I held my breath and very, very slowly relaxed into the touch. I let my own tired head rest back against the wall, accepting the weight of him on my shoulder. It felt right, in a way that nothing had felt right for a very long time. It was a simple, innocent gesture, born of fatigue, but it felt like the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. Here, in this dark, empty room, Surrounded by the chaos of a life in transition, everything felt still and clear. All the anxiety, all the second-guessing, all the fear that had been my constant companions simply melted away, replaced by the solid, warm presence of the man sleeping on my shoulder. I didn't know what it meant or what would happen next, but for the first time, I allowed myself to simply exist in a moment of pure, unadulterated hope. I closed my eyes and just breathed. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time had lost all meaning, measured only by the steady rhythm of Caleb's breathing against my neck. Eventually, the pins and needles in my arm and the growing stiffness in my back forced a return to reality. With a reluctance that felt like a physical weight, I gently shifted. Caleb stirred instantly, lifting his head. His eyes were bleary with sleep. He blinked a few times, a confused look on his face as he processed where he was and where his head had just been. A flush crept up his neck. "Oh, man," he mumbled, rubbing his face with his hands. Did I fall asleep on you? I am so sorry." "It's okay," I said, my voice softer than I intended. We were both exhausted. I tried for a casual smile, but my face felt stiff. The spell was broken, and the air was suddenly thick with a new kind of tension, awkwardness. "Still," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Sorry, he pushed himself to his feet, stretching his arms over his head with a groan. "Wow. Okay. I think my body is officially shutting down." "Mine too," I said, following his lead and getting up, my joints protesting loudly. "I should really let you get some sleep this time." I made a definitive move toward the door. The fragile bubble of intimacy had popped, and I felt a desperate need to escape back to my own territory before I said or did something stupid. "Yeah," he said, walking me to the door. The hallway lights spilled into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us. "Hey, Miles," he said, just as I was about to step out. I turned back. "Seriously, thank you. For everything. I mean it. Anytime," I said, and the word felt both entirely true and deeply inadequate. I gave him a small wave and crossed the hall to my apartment, the sound of his door clicking shut behind me feeling incredibly final. I leaned against my own door, just as I had that morning, but the feeling was completely different. The frantic, hopeful energy was gone, replaced by a churning sea of confusion and self-doubt. The next few days were excruciating. My internal monologue, usually a quiet hum, became a relentless, screaming committee meeting. I replayed the moment on the floor 1,000 times, analyzing it from every possible angle. Was it just exhaustion? Of course it was just exhaustion. Two guys, dead tired after a day of manual labor. One of them dozes off on the other. It means nothing. It's a completely normal, platonic thing to happen. But then another voice would pipe up, the hopeful, treacherous one. But what if it wasn't? What about the way he listened to you? The way he told you about his mom's painting? The way it felt when his head was on your shoulder? I was a mess. I found myself hovering by my peephole like a spy in a bad movie, trying to catch a glimpse of him. Our hallway encounters became fraught with a new, unspoken tension. The easy nods and hey-s were replaced with a stilted awkwardness. We'd both say hi at the same time, then laugh nervously. Or one of us would be fumbling with our keys, avoiding the other's gaze. It was awful. Each brief, clumsy interaction was another piece of evidence for the prosecution. See, my anxious brain would argue. He's embarrassed. He thinks you're weird. He's trying to avoid you. You misread everything, you idiot. I was convinced I had imagined the whole connection, that I had projected my own longing onto a simple act of kindness and a moment of shared fatigue. The hope that had bloomed so brightly just a few nights before was quickly wilting under the harsh glare of my own insecurity. I tried to throw myself into work, to lose myself in color palettes and font pairings, but his face kept appearing on my screen. I'd be designing a logo and find myself sketching the curve of his jawline in my notebook. I'd be reading an article and realize I hadn't absorbed a single word because I was listening for the sound of his door opening or the faint strum of his guitar. He seemed to be avoiding me, and I, in turn, started avoiding him. I'd wait until I was sure the coast was clear before I took out the trash. I'd take the stairs instead of the elevator. The proximity that had once felt so thrilling now felt like a form of low-grade torture. We were two people living 20 feet apart, separated by a chasm of unspoken words and overanalyzed moments. The silence from his apartment felt different now, not just quiet but empty. I hadn't heard the guitar once since that night. Maybe I had ruined things. Maybe I had made him so uncomfortable that he couldn't even relax in his own home. The thought was a sharp, painful sting. This was why I kept my world small. This was the risk. This was the price of letting a little bit of hope in the door. After nearly a week of this silent, painful dance, I had reached a decision. I had to let it go. I had to force myself to go back to the way things were, to reclassify him in my mind as simply the neighbor. I would be polite, friendly, and distant. I would smother the ridiculous hope that had taken root in my chest and get back to my normal, safe, quiet life. It was for the best. It was the only way to protect myself from the inevitable disappointment. I felt a sad sense of resignation settle over me. It was a familiar feeling, at least. That evening, resolved to my new, sensible path, I was making dinner when there was a knock on my door. My heart did a familiar, traitorous leap. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into a mask of polite indifference, and opened the door. It was Caleb. He stood there, looking just as nervous as I felt. He was wearing a simple black Henley that made his shoulders look even broader, and he was worrying his lower lip with his teeth, a habit I was starting to find incredibly endearing. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey," I replied, my carefully constructed indifference crumbling at the first sign of contact. An awkward silence stretched between us. He rocked back and forth on his heels, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He began, looking at the floor, then up at me, then back at the floor. Can we talk for a second?" My mind raced. This was it. The "let's just be friends" speech. The "sorry if I gave you the wrong impression" conversation. I braced myself for the impact. "Sure," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in." He walked into my apartment, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller, warmer. He looked around, taking in my world, the neat bookshelves, the art prints on the wall, the large monitor dominating my desk. "Nice place," he said, his voice still tentative. "It's very you." "Thanks," I said, my throat suddenly dry. "It's clean, anyway. Unlike yours, last time I saw it." I meant it as a light-hearted joke, but it came out sounding lame and awkward. He didn't seem to notice. He turned to face me, his expression serious, his hands now clasped behind his back. "Look, Miles," he started, and my stomach plummeted. "I'm sorry things have been weird this week." I hadn't noticed. I lied poorly. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Yeah, right. Look, the reason they've been weird is my fault. I don't know." In my head about things, he took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. "That day, when you helped me move. I need to be honest about that. Here it comes," I thought. The gentle letdown. "The moving company didn't cancel on me," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "There was no moving company. I mean, I rented the truck, but I was always planning on moving everything myself. Or, I guess, not by myself." I just stared at him, completely bewildered. "What? Why would you lie about that?" He finally met my gaze, and his hazel eyes were filled with a raw vulnerability that stole the air from my lungs. "Because I wanted an excuse to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd seen you in the hall for weeks, and I thought you were. Well, I thought you were beautiful. But I'm a complete idiot when it comes to this stuff. I had no idea how to just start a conversation. So I came up with this whole ridiculous damsel in distress scenario with the storage unit." I was speechless. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to process this new information. The entire inciting incident of our story, the very foundation of my week-long anxiety spiral, was a fabrication. A sweet, elaborate, and utterly insane fabrication. He must have taken my silence for disbelief or rejection, because he rushed to continue. "And then that night, on the floor, I wasn't completely asleep when he gestured vaguely between us. When my head ended up on your shoulder. I was just so tired, and you were right there, and it just felt right. But then I panicked. I thought maybe I'd crossed a line, that I'd totally misread everything and freak you out. So I've been avoiding you because I was embarrassed and scared I'd ruined any chance I might have had. Every single theory my anxious brain had concocted was wrong. He wasn't avoiding me because he thought I was weird. He was avoiding me because he thought I thought he was weird. He wasn't straight. He wasn't unattainable. He had been just as nervous, just as hopeful, and just as lost as I was. We had been two fools, sitting in our separate apartments, torturing ourselves for the exact same reason. A laugh bubbled up inside me, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full, genuine laugh that seemed to release a week's worth of tension from my body. Caleb looked horrified. "Oh God, you think I'm a psycho?" "I'm a psycho." I knew this was a mistake. "No," I said, cutting him off, my laughter subsiding into a wide, shaky grin. "No, you're not a psycho. You're just unbelievable." I shook my head, still trying to wrap my mind around it all. "Caleb, I have spent the last 6 days convincing myself that I was the one who misread everything, that I was the one who freaked you out." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a wave of palpable relief. "You mean?" "Yes," I said, closing the small distance between us. My heart was no longer hammering with anxiety, but with a clear, bright certainty. I haven't been able to think about anything else. You falling asleep on my shoulder was the best part of my year. His smile, when it came, was like the sun breaking through the clouds. It lit up his whole face. Yeah, I breathed. And then, all the words, all the overthinking, all the awkwardness fell away. He raised a hand, his calloused fingers gently cupping my jaw. His touch was hesitant at first, questioning, and I leaned into it, giving him the answer he was looking for. His thumb stroked my cheek, and in that simple gesture, there was more communication than in all our stilted hallway conversations. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, but that was the last thing on earth I wanted to do. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't like in the movies. There were no fireworks, no swelling orchestra. It was better. It was quiet and soft and real. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and unspoken confessions, a confirmation of everything we had both been too scared to hope for. It was gentle and questioning at first, then deepened as all the pent-up tension and longing of the past week poured into it. It felt like coming home. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air. "So," he murmured, his voice thick, "my lease is up in a year. You think you can help me move again?" I laughed, a real happy sound. "Absolutely not. But I'll order the pizza." In the weeks and months that followed our confession, life shifted into a new, wonderful rhythm. The awkward hallway greetings were replaced by lingering good morning kisses at my door before I started work, and the quiet evenings in my apartment were replaced by shared dinners in his. Caleb's apartment, once a chaotic landscape of boxes, slowly transformed into a home. Our home. We fell into the easy, comfortable patterns of a couple. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating on a piece of woodwork. He learned that I need at least 2 cups of coffee before I can form a coherent sentence in the morning. I helped him hang his mother's painting in the place of honor above the sofa, and the first time he played his guitar for me, a soft, beautiful melody he'd written himself, I felt like the luckiest person on the planet. Our worlds, once so separate, began to merge. My friends loved him for his easy laugh and his terrible puns. His friends, a boisterous crew of fellow carpenters and artists, welcomed me into their circle without a second thought. The man I had once observed from behind a peephole, a handsome stranger I deemed completely out of my league, was now the man who fell asleep with his arm draped over my chest, who knew exactly how I liked my tea, who could make me laugh harder than anyone I'd ever met. The empty mattress that had once been the stage for our turning point was now our bed, covered in soft linens and piled high with pillows. Many nights, I'd lie awake for a few moments after he'd fallen asleep, just watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the picture of peace. I would think back to that first day, to the dust and sweat and the sheer exhaustion of it all. I thought of the weight of his head on my shoulder, a simple, accidental touch that had held the entire universe of possibility within it. One Saturday, about 6 months after that first moving day, I was sitting on our sofa, reading a book, while Caleb was putting the finishing touches on a bookshelf he'd built for us. It was a beautiful piece, made of rich, dark walnut, designed to perfectly fit the wall in our living room. The air was filled with the clean, sweet scent of freshly sanded wood, a smell I now associated with safety and happiness. He ran his hand over the smooth surface, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He caught me watching him and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I smiled back, closing my book. "I was just thinking about boxes," I said, "and how strange it is that our whole story started with them." He came over and sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders and pulling me close. "It didn't start with boxes," he said softly, his lips brushing against my temple. "It started with a really nervous guy trying to figure out how to talk to the beautiful man across the hall." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the gesture now as natural as breathing. It was all so much simpler than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I had spent so much of my life building walls to keep myself safe, curating a quiet, orderly existence to avoid the messiness of real connection. I thought that was strength, but I was wrong. Vulnerability, I was learning, wasn't a weakness. It's an invitation. It's the bravest thing in the world to admit you need help, whether it's with a truck full of furniture or a heart full of hope. Sometimes you just have to take a risk, open the door, and say yes. You never know when you might be helping someone build the foundation of a home you'll one day share.